Annyeong. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Chin, and a couple disclaimers. I was very sick for a couple days, which is why I wasn't here yesterday, so I'm on a little bit of medication right now, so I'm a little bit... and also, I have some notes here, and the slides are up here, so whenever I click here to change the slide, a very nice gentleman back there is also changing this, so there might be some weirdness there. Anyway, today I'm gonna tell the story of how shaving my head made me a better programmer, sort of. Mostly it's the story of how I became a programmer and a teacher and what I learned along the way. So I'm originally from Paris. Bonjour. I moved to the United States to go to college, and that's where I learned to code. I originally wanted to be an astronaut, as you can see. So I joined the engineering program at my school, and one of the first classes that I had to take was an intro to programming class in Python. So I took it, and I fell in love with code immediately. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced. I felt like I could create art for the first time. It was amazing. So I started coding, and I decided to major in computer science. And that was an easy decision, but staying in computer science and continuing to code was not so easy. And the reason is not that learning to code is hard. It is. It's frustrating. It's a lot of dealing with your computer telling you over and over that you're failing. But that wasn't the hard part. The hardest part was dealing with other people's perceptions and my own perceptions of my abilities as a programmer. At the time, I was one of maybe 5 women in my computer science classes. There were some classes where I was the only girl. And most of the other people in my classes had been coding since they were 10 years old. And so even though I did really well in all my classes, no one really wanted to work with me or talk to me. It was really lonely. It felt like being hypervisible and invisible at the same time. And this was before all of the scandals came out about the tech industry and sexism, before people started talking about tech's lack of diversity as a problem, so there wasn't really a shared language around it. And so this was my first year in university in the computer science department, and it really didn't seem like the place for me. People didn't believe I was a programmer. They would say, prove it. Do you even know what the command line is? Which is a really ridiculous question. But it wasn't just the students. One of my friends told me that one of our computer science professors said this to him. When are you gonna fuck Alex? So my peers didn't see me as a programmer, and my teachers didn't either. But I'm really stubborn, so I decided that I was gonna be a good programmer in a way that would be unquestionable to the world. So I joined my school's programming team, and I became a leader of the computer club, and I took all of the hardest computer science classes, and I won a bunch of hackathons, and I finally became accepted by my peers. And it's ridiculous that for other kids, all they had to do was show up and look nerdy. But I made it, so it didn't really matter. So then I graduated with a computer science degree in 2013, and I started my career as a professional programmer in New York. And this photo was taken in front of Yankee Stadium, in front of a McDonald's. And though I had experienced some discrimination in school, for being a woman in the computer science department, I was really not prepared for what was about to happen in the professional world. And some of it was small stuff like microaggressions, like people telling me over and over, like, are you sure you're a programmer? But some of it was bigger, scarier, more serious incidents, like what we've seen happened at Uber recently. And so I'm going to tell you about some of these stories, and I actually have never shared them publicly before. And there's going to be some public shaming involved also. So here we go, 5 stories that made me want to quit programming. At my first software engineering internship, I was the only woman on the engineering team, and a few weeks into the job, the QA lead, that's like an important job on an engineering team, he asked me to get coffee. And I was new, and he was nice, and so I said yes. And we were getting coffee, and he started asking me some really personal questions like, where do you live? What trains do you take to work? Do you have a boyfriend? Does he like it when you dress sexy for him? Does he get jealous? Do you wear lingerie for him? And so on and so forth. And after that, he kept trying to spend time with me, and I was really nervous around him, and I hated having to work with him every day. But I was too nervous to tell anyone because he was an important guy, and I was just an intern. But on my last day, I finally got the courage to tell my boss what happened. And he was really surprised. He was like, but he's such a nice guy. And this is him. And I later found out that he continued to harass and stalk women at the company and even got promoted. But you know, he was a really nice guy and he was a really high performer. So after that, though, I mostly wore jeans and t-shirts to work, and I stopped wearing makeup or perfume. After that, I got another job as a front-end engineer. The team was great, even though I was the only girl on the team. It was safe. I felt supported, and I did a good job. And because we were a part of a portfolio of companies, I got to go to a lot of tech events and tech conferences, and the job was awesome, but the stuff that happened at those events was not awesome. Soon after I joined, our team was invited to a networking event organized by our venture capital firm. And it was a nice evening with an open bar, and after a few drinks, I started talking to another programmer, and at one point during our conversation, he tried to kiss me, and I had to physically push him away. And after that happened, I was pretty upset, so I tried to make the most out of the event. You know, I went to talk to someone else, it was a designer, and after, you know, we exchanged a couple words, he also tried to kiss me. And I had to push him away, and at this point I was really upset, and so I yelled at him. I was like, this is not okay. And he told me that I shouldn't be so stuck up. So I took that as my cue to leave the event. And after that, I really tried to avoid tech events with alcohol, and I never had more than one drink at a tech event. A couple of months later, our engineering team went to a conference, a programming conference in San Francisco, and one of our investors was based there. And he invited me to meet with him to talk about work and my career, and he said I had a lot of promise, so I thought that was a really good opportunity. So we met for dinner, and I realized quickly this was not about work, this was a date, and so I tried to steer the conversation away, you know, towards work. I asked him questions about the company and investing, and I was like taking notes on my phone and trying to send like every possible signal that this was not a romantic situation without offending him. But he wasn't really getting it, and after dinner he asked me to come home with him for champagne, and he was really insistent, and it was hard to say no because he was an investor of the company I worked for, but I refused and I got out of there. And after that, I tried to avoid him as much as possible, and I was a lot less friendly with the men that I met through work. A couple months later, I went to a programming conference in Mexico. And it was a really cool conference, and people like lived in little cabins, so you would share cabins with a few other people. And there was a ton of drinking at this conference. And one night, one of the conference speakers who was staying in my cabin let himself into my room, super drunk. I was asleep, and he woke me up and tried to convince me to let him sleep in my bed with him. He was saying he didn't want to sleep alone. I eventually got him out of there. And the next day, I told the conference organizers what happened, so they sent out a reminder about the code of conduct via email. And I spent the rest of the conference pretty much locked in my room, not wanting to run into him. And after that, my engineering team always sent a male chaperone with me to tech conferences, so that wasn't great. A few months after that, our company was growing, so we hired a new VP of engineering, and he'd never worked with a woman before, and he was my new boss, and he would tell me things that would just make my skin crawl. Like, he'd make jokes about how women only existed to serve men. He'd make comments about my appearance, like telling me he didn't like the way I dressed or how I did my hair. One time I was wearing all black and he told me I looked like a mustard sandwich. And I think that's because I'm Asian and my skin is yellow. I don't know. When our CEO disciplined him for his behavior towards me, he apologized to me. He said that women like the attention. He also said that he wished we had more women on the team, but that would mean he'd have to lower the hiring bar, you know, because women are just worse than men at everything. And so even though I was one of the first engineers on the team, and literally my code was all over that code base, he kept pushing me onto smaller and smaller projects and giving me grunt work. And at one point I was asked to stop talking during product meetings because I intimidated the men there. So it became really impossible for me to work there, and I ended up having to quit because it was just like too hostile of a work environment for me. But is it really quitting if you're pushed out? This is the worst guy, by the way. Never work with him. So now nowhere felt safe. Not my job, not the tech world, not even code. People were even leaving sexist comments on my pull requests on open source projects. And all of this happened when I was 22, so I was 1 year into my career. And this was not fine. I was really depressed. I felt like, why do I love programming if programming doesn't love me back? I was just trying to do my job, just trying to do what I loved. I was just trying to code. And it was becoming impossible for me to do so. It really felt like it should be maybe the end of my career, and that I would become one of the 50% of women who leave software at some point in their career. But as I said, I'm really stubborn. So I decided again to try to find a solution. So I sought out my friends for advice, and I realized I only had male friend programmers at the time. So I asked them to introduce me to female engineers at their companies, and I just tried to meet as many of them as possible. And so I went on blind coffee dates with a bunch of ladies, and I was looking for advice and looking to create a support network. I would ask them, what do I do? How do I survive in this field? I got a lot of different advice. One woman who'd been a professional programmer for over 10 years told me that when she cut her hair short, she stopped getting sexually harassed at tech events. So I was like, okay. This one male friend told me, why don't you become a badass programmer? Like, become really well known for your expertise, become famous, and then people will have to respect you and take you seriously. So I figured I could try that. So I started giving talks at meetups about things that I'm really passionate about, so like the JavaScript programming language or accessibility on the web. And it went really well, and after a while I got invited to speak at a really big programming conference where people were flying in from around the country to attend. They paid hundreds of dollars for a ticket. I got to share the stage with people I really respected, people whose tools I used every day. And I was definitely the youngest person on stage. I was 23 at that point, and so I was really excited. I was like a badass. So I gave my talk, and it went really well. But then the first thing that I got asked after I gave my talk was, this guy asked me, how do I talk to women at bars? And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. After all the work that I'd done to get there, even in the moment when my expertise was undeniable, like I was literally on the stage at a conference that he paid to attend, like learning things from me, even then I wasn't seen as a programmer. So I learned that being a badass doesn't help. Even if I become a badass, I still don't get any respect. So at this point I was really angry. I was really sick of being treated this way because of my gender and because of my appearance. But I'm a hacker, so I decided to hack my appearance. And so I shaved my head. And this was before Stranger Things. And this was before Emma Gonzalez, who is amazing. So it wasn't as cool then. But so I shaved my head, and the weirdest thing happened. Suddenly, overnight, I became a really good programmer. I stopped getting hit on at conferences, and people listened to me and respected me. And I stopped being this mix of hyper-sexualized and underskilled programmer. And I tried to think about it scientifically, like, is there something in hair that makes me worse about being at programming, right? Like, maybe my hair was weighing me down, like dragging my programming skills down. But no, that's not right, because this guy's a really good programmer. And so is this guy. And this guy too. Just kidding. That was Serial from the movie Hackers, which is an amazing film that you should all see. So anyway, it had nothing to do with my hair, obviously. But now, all of a sudden, I was seen as a good programmer. So what had changed? If not my actual skills, which hadn't leveled up overnight, it was the way I was being perceived by my peers. I didn't present as feminine anymore. And so it was okay for me to be a programmer, and even a good one. And this was like a mind-blowing discovery for me, because even though I knew I was a good programmer and I knew about sexism, now I had proof on a really personal level. And so I realized that the tech industry is not a meritocracy, unlike I used to think, and unlike many people had told me. This industry doesn't allow capable, passionate people like me to succeed regardless of their skills. And it systematically pushes out women, people of color, people with disabilities, and more. And I thought about the advice people had given me, which was all about changing myself. They said, cut your hair, become a badass, be more of a bitch, learn to ignore it. And I thought, no, it's not me who should change, it's the tech industry that should change. Now technology is a part of everything we do, you know? It shapes how we interact with the world and with each other. It controls money, how we learn, who we date, who becomes president. And humans build technology, so the people who are writing code and the way they're writing code really matters. By the way, this is a Google image search for the word technology, so FYI, technology is blue. Right now, for the most part, the gatekeepers of technology are a small and homogeneous group that is not representative of the people who use technology. And this is a problem because a homogeneous tech workforce leads to massive blind spots. Like, for example, how the iPhone X can't tell Chinese women apart, or how a few years ago, Google Photos launched with image recognition that labeled pictures of black people as gorillas. That was pretty bad. So if we want to solve the world's problems, we need people from all backgrounds building technology, because we need diverse perspectives to solve complex problems, and because those who experience problems are the best equipped to solve them. Right now, the tech industry is broken because it's homogenous and because it's run by a bunch of assholes who aren't held accountable for their decisions or their actions. So I decided, as long as I'm in the tech industry, I'm going to work to fix it. I'm going to make it more diverse, more inclusive, and better for all humans. So I started on this new quest to teach underrepresented and vulnerable populations to code, so that we can change the face of technology, so that we can create a pathway for economic mobility for the populations that have been left out of tech, and so that we can empower them to build the solutions that affect them instead of putting their fate in the hands of others. So I started teaching. First, on the side as a volunteer at a high school for recent immigrants in the Bronx and in Harlem. Then I joined a free programming school for adults from underrepresented backgrounds, where I helped launch the program. Our class was 50% women, 50% immigrants, 50% Black and Latino, 50% without a college degree. The average income of the class when it started was about $20,000 a year. Graduates have gone on to work at the New York Times and Spotify and Vice, BuzzFeed, and make upwards of $120,000 a year now. And one of the projects that came from this class was this Android app called Blazon, which is a community of women, children, and people of color and LGBTQ folks that allows you to combat street harassment. And one of the students from that class, Madeline, she works at Pinterest now. She started a group called Chicas that's for Latinas in tech, and she's a total icon. Then I taught with Technovation. Two of my high school students built an app that aims to reduce produce waste. There's a lot, Americans, they waste a lot of food. I don't know if you know this. So by connecting farms to restaurants so that farmers can sell their produce at a discounted rate to restaurants. It's called Grow Green. It's built in Swift. And Rachel on the left, she is at Yale now studying computer science. And Priya on the right just graduated high school and she's continuing to build the app. She was just named Crane's 20 Under 20 this past year. And actually a month ago, she spoke at the Global Food Innovation Conference in Milan. And after all those experiences teaching for others, I finally decided to start my own education program. I joined DOKU, which is a global education design studio based in New York and in Tokyo, where I work now as the director of technology. And there I launched my own tech education program for kids called Code Forward, where kids from all over the city come together to build technology to make a better world. We teach our students to code as an ethical endeavor. We teach them the importance of building technology with empathy and humanity in mind and to weigh their decisions as software engineers. Our student body and teacher body reflect the diversity of New York. So we invite guest speakers from the tech industry, and all of them come from underrepresented backgrounds in tech because representation matters. This is Ope Bukola. She's a product manager at Google Classroom. This is Kat Small. She's a designer from Etsy and SoundCloud. This is David Huerta, digital security trainer for the Freedom of the Press Foundation. All these people came to talk to my students. At the end of the program, our students showcase their projects at a demo day, and I'll tell you about my favorite project. Marco, he wanted to tackle the problem of lack of art in his neighborhood in Brooklyn. So he believed that bringing more street art to his neighborhood would create a stronger sense of community and make the community safer, happier, and healthier. So his solution was an app that connects artists to people who own walls so that they can cover gray walls with street art. It's called Street Talk, and it's awesome. And I'm really excited about this program because these kids are learning to code in an environment unlike any other, where the community is made up of people from all backgrounds, where the experts they learn from do not look like who we've learned technologists look like, and where they're learning to code to solve problems that affect them and the people around them. And these kids, they're the tech leaders of tomorrow. And we're training them to become radical technologists. And I want to tell you about one last project, which is really my passion project. With the rise in visibility of issues surrounding police brutality and mass incarceration in the United States, I wanted to find a way to learn more about and contribute positively to criminal justice reform. And I wanted to learn from people who had experience with the criminal justice system. So I started to teach people who had been to prison how to code. And that's how I founded the Code Cooperative. The Code Cooperative is an educational program in which people who have just come out of prison learn how to use a computer and the internet and learn to code so that they can create social change. We launched in October of 2016, right after the presidential election. And the program's totally free. The curriculum is open source. The computers and space are donated by tech companies. There's literally no cost for the students. We donate laptops to them for the whole program. And all the students are beginners. Some of our students had barely ever used a computer or the internet. And all of them were recently released from prison, and some of them had been in prison for a really long time. And they all built projects that highlighted issues that they had seen in the criminal justice system, issues that had affected them. One of my students was a 65-year-old man. He'd been in prison for over 20 years. And at 65, he learned HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and built a website that teaches visitors about the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow in the US criminal justice system today. And our next class starts in 3 weeks. And for this class, we're pairing each student with a mentor who is a professional programmer. And the goals for the next class are really three. One, to teach our students essential skills that will help them succeed in the digital world as a pathway to equity. that will lead to better work opportunities and that will empower them to be creators and entrepreneurs, to build empathy in the tech world by connecting software engineers with vulnerable populations that they're not used to working with or thinking about. And most importantly, we're empowering our students to shine a light on the issues that they've identified in the US criminal justice system with the hopes of solving them. So if you're excited about what we're doing with the Code Cooperative, you can come talk to me about it. We're looking for volunteers and donations. And before I go, I want to leave you with a couple lessons that I've learned from my journey from programmer to teacher. One, excellence in code can come from anyone. Anyone can become a great programmer if you give them a safe space to learn, if you believe that they can succeed. And these projects that my students have built, they're important. They're game changers. And we need technologists from all backgrounds if we have hope for a brighter future. This is a photo of some of my DOKU students wearing our class shirts. On it is the binary representation of the words, "With great power comes great responsibility." I tell my students that being able to write code is like a superpower, so we should use it for good. Thank you.